Obviously, we tend to focus on terrorism, relationships with Afghanistan, that sort of thing. But there is a whole other side of Pakistan with some really interesting and vibrant and exciting things going on.
The tone, it's dominated by terrorism and Taliban and all of that, and that's an important story. That's a very important story. But there are other stories here, and we do look for them, and we try to give a good mix of what's happening in Pakistan, aside from the story that everyone writes about all the time.
We also have a philosophy that if we hadn't heard of it and it fascinated us, it's then a story that our American audience or world audience would be interested in.
I think it's not so much what isn't reported, but you know how there are trends. I mean, somebody is going to do a story on a fashion show in Karachi and how that's, you know, kind of an answer to extremism. And then everybody in the Western media kind of picks up that story, and for the 1 week, you know, that's the only story you're going to see. But that's not Pakistan, is it? I mean, Pakistan is so much more. I mean, it's also about, you know, how you have a country that is possibly heading towards a democratic transition for the first time in its history. And you have, for the first time, a president who, despite everything that people said, has almost managed to complete his tenure. You have, you know, different parties coming up, and one really doesn't know what's going to happen next. I mean, it's an exciting, vibrant place. Yes, there is terrorism. Yes, you have problems with extremism. You have problems with the economy. But, I mean, in spite of that, there is still a huge number of young people out there who are very determined to make something out of this country.
There's a trade-off there because the local journalists often have better contacts, are better able to get into a story, but know that doing so might get them into a terrible amount of trouble.
There are definitely stories, especially related to security issues and certain groups which operate in this country. It's far easier for a foreign journalist to write it, even for an Indian journalist to write it, because I know I have friends in the Pakistani media who will not touch the same stories.
So, you know, we've seen a lot of problems in Baluchistan with reporters there trying to cover it. Any story here that really tries to look at what the ISI is doing, you know, you look at the tragic case of Salim Shahzad, and he was obviously investigating militants, the security services here, you know, some real dark corners of what happens here in Pakistan. As a foreign reporter, you know, the worst that can happen to me, I think, is that I would get kicked out. However, I don't have those sort of contacts to get really to grips with it. So, you know, I think there are topics and subjects that I can touch on. You know, whether it's religious stories, blasphemy stories, you know, there's a huge reluctance among local journalists here to cover blasphemy stories because they could be putting their life on the line. So I don't have that sort of concern for my own security, but I also recognise that local reporters may actually be better placed to do those stories, and that's a real dilemma and a real problem.
We can, I think, report with very little fear on the ISI or the bigger, you know, question of who runs the country, because if they want to throw us out, they can throw us out, but we're not under risk of being abducted or jailed or censored. We act here as if we were in the United States.
Well, it bothers me in a sense that journalists are getting killed here. You know, it doesn't actually impact upon my security because, of course, the people being killed are the local journalists, the people being harassed are the local journalists, the people getting threats are the local journalists, and there's been a horrendous death toll since I've been here. So, you know, it bothers me that journalists are targeted in that way. As I say, in terms of my own personal security, you know, the foreigners, we're not the ones that, we might be at risk for other reasons, but that's not, no one's going to try and, I mean, I hope no one's going to try and interfere with the job I'm doing in such a brutal and obvious way, but I think local journalists are paying a really terrible toll.
I've covered insurgencies back in India, but this is a place where this fear of something that could go wrong has possibly been the strongest. I mean, it's something that you do keep thinking about. It's not an easy thing. It's something that you keep, it's always there at the back of your mind.
You always hear that Pakistan is what is the most or one of the most dangerous countries for journalists. I think that's mostly for Pakistani journalists. And so I have absolute respect for these men and women who are doing their jobs and putting themselves at risk. I think that the media here covers, there are people who will risk their lives to get the story here.